How to measure Noah's Ark, Part 1. Noah's Ark today is inside of a huge crevice, or cavern, on Mount Ararat, at something like 4,500 meters above sea level. Till recently, and probably till a couple of years ago, the ship was almost completely covered by ice and snow, with probably a glacier that covered the whole area and covering this cavern's entrance. Then, for some unknown and mysterious reason, the glacier that covered this whole area, including this cavern, almost completely disappeared, exposing the opening of a cave or crevice in the rock wall. On the bottom of this cavern, an enormous structure, appearing of artificial construction and resembling a ship-type vessel of odd design. The Bible does not give any description of how Noah's Ark appeared, but only that of the reasons for its construction. A few details of what it had to include, the building material, and what everyone is interpreting of the ship's measures from what is written in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15. The ship at 4,500 meters appears to be broken in at least 3 pieces, but a portion of its front side is at 4,800 meters, revealing that it was here and at an elevation of 4,800 meters that the ship landed on Mount Ararat, when the waters of the Genesis chapter 6 great flood began to retreat from the earth. From the little we read of Noah's Ark in Genesis chapter 6, this ship has it. But one thing this ship does not have from Genesis chapter 6 is those measures we read in verse 15, or what everyone till this day has been understanding of verse 15, believing those measures, that of the ship in its entirety. The measures alone of this ship, confronting them with those measures we read in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15, would confirm this ship being Noah's Ark, even if it had nothing of ship design or resembling that of a ship. The ship on the bottom of that cavern visibly resembles a ship with its front side. It has decks and floors. From what we read in Genesis chapter 6, it is completely coated with a dark type substance that could be pitch, as written in Genesis chapter 6, and at an elevation of 4,800 meters, where the ship landed on Mount Ararat, would confirm the Genesis chapter 6 great flood and it being a global flood. But the measures of this ship that would confirm it to be Noah's Ark are not those measures in length, width, and height that we read in verse 15, understood as being the ship's measures. Everything else of that little we read of Noah's Ark in Genesis chapter 6, we see it in this ship, having it the most likeliest candidate for Noah's Ark. But we do not have the measures that would prove it to be Noah's Ark. The ship's measures have them greater than the measures of Noah's Ark's measures as written and understood in verse 15. And here is the mystery. How could we have a ship that is the most likeliest candidate for Noah's Ark? In fact, what we see in these images is visibly a ship that landed almost on top of a mountain at an elevation above sea level that would have the Genesis chapter 6 great flood, a flood that devastated the whole planet, as we see written in Genesis chapter 6, on a mountain that is, of the Ararat area of where the ship landed, and having landed on Mount Ararat. A ship appearing thousands of years old, with that long, oblong, box-type building that makes most of the ship, and appearing as a cargo-type building. With the little we read of Noah's Ark from Genesis chapter 6 present in this ship, but then it lacking its most important detail that would confirm it to be Noah's Ark, with its measures, not those of Genesis chapter 6, verse 15. The Durupinar site is something less than 2,000 meters, a mound shaped as a boat-type vessel, just across the border of Mount Ararat in Iran. Here we see a mound shaped as a ship, that because of its measures, appearing to be those measures of Noah's Ark as written in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15, would have a Noah's Ark, but at an elevation above sea level that would have the Great Flood, not a global flood. Noah built 2 ships, a much bigger vessel, having landed days or weeks at Mount Ararat at 4,800 meters, before Noah landed his ship on a much lower elevation at barely 2,000 meters above sea level, or some other Noah, or that there were other survivors of the Great Flood who built their ships, even bigger ships, and filled them with peoples and all their needs, including animals and cattle. We do not have scripture for this. We have scripture of one Noah's Ark. So it has to be one of these 2 ships, the real Noah's Ark. How to solve this mystery with only satellite imagery. The Durupinar site, because of its measures, apparently being those measures we read in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15, is not Noah's Ark. That ship on 4,500 meters, because it being bigger than the measures we read in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15, is Noah's Ark. And you know why? Because those measures we read in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15 are not to be understood as the ship's measures, but of something of that ship, built in that ship, for specific purposes. This would have that Noah's Ark was a much bigger ship than from what everyone is understanding of what are those measures written in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15. And the reason for this is because the ship, at least of my knowledge, is still unknown for most people, and because of verse 15 wrongly interpreted. With this episode, I begin a study on the mystery of the measures of Noah's Ark, of the why the ship is bigger, much bigger, than the measures we read in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15, to then be followed by another study on who built Noah's Ark. Bible teachings have that who built Noah's Ark was Noah and his family, yes, but they were not alone. Maybe this movie is not so far from who helped Noah build his ship. Giants? Yes. And they did not die out and are still alive in remote places of the earth, away from humans. This image here was taken through Google Earth over a very remote area of the African rainforest. Though the image is blurry, from what it shows, it appears to show a pregnant woman in a village. From the Google Earth measuring tools, She is almost 8 meters tall, and she is not alone. There are other giants in this image, even taller. Probably a small community. With a workforce of giants, Noah built his ship. 8 people, Noah, his wife, 3 sons, and their wives? Impossible. Without heavy machinery. And still 8 people would not be enough to build a ship using heavy machinery. A ship almost the size of that of the Titanic. Giants with giant machinery helped Noah build his ship. This image of what appears as a machine-type device, resembling a crane, with metal-type components and rotating blades. It is 13 meters tall. No human being of average height could make this thing work in a time believed not having machinery, and they running on electricity. Unless who made it work was a giant of at least 10 meters tall, making it work through the use of his hands, arms, and feet. Next episode, what are these measures of the ship? That from what everyone is understanding of Genesis chapter 6 verse 15 to be the ship's measures, when instead they are not. End of part 1.